the Global Climate Change Copenhagen Petition. I'm now continuing with the fifth of the 12 sections that are in the petition. 5. The state will commit to and urge other states to commit to the transition to a zero-carbon society, which should meet the needs of all nations and people in an equitable fashion and should be based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, human rights, and social justice. To achieve this end, the state will propose and urge other states to propose that the industrial states, as major greenhouse gas producers, must be prepared to enter into binding obligations not only through targets and time frames, but also through funding mechanisms. The fund could be named the Fund for the Implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it would fund socially equitable and environmentally safe and sound renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, and forestry. This fund would replace the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, as a major source of funding for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 6. The dominant greenhouse gas producing and gas emitting states will finance this international fund. Funds traditionally distributed not only through the GEF, but also through the Bretton Woods institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and additional bilateral funds such as those in the German Fund for International Climate Initiative, should be channeled through the Global Fund. This fund would be indispensable for preventing climate change and for achieving the objectives of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The state will commit and urge other states to commit the abandoning of the models of exponential growth and of overconsumptive development with the implementation of a global ban imposed on the externalization of the social and environmental costs of global pollution. 7. The state will propose and will urge other states to propose that other budgetary sources for this fund would be the redirecting of subsidies from socially inequitable and environmentally unsound, non-sustainable energy to socially equitable and environmentally safe and sound renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, and forestry. 8. The state will advocate and will urge other states to advocate measures to alleviate the impacts of climate change, 2 of which would include 1. The cancellation of the outstanding debt of developing states, and 2. The implementation of the minimal, long-standing commitment of 0.7% of GDP being transferred to overseas development aid. The ODA must serve the needs not of developed states, but of the developing states. 9. The state will recognize and will urge other states to recognize that all these funding measures would only just begin to compensate for the emissions debt owed by the developed state to the developing states. The impact of climate change on the poor, on indigenous peoples, vulnerable communities, and especially low-lying states will be the greatest, and they must be assisted by industrial states which have a legal and moral duty to provide funds for socially equitable and renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, and forestry. 10. The state will implement and will urge other major greenhouse gas producing states to implement the actions that would discharge the obligations incurred when they signed and ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and will be forced to repay the emissions debt. Provisions of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change have become international peremptory norms, and as such are binding. Historical emissions should be calculated and assessment made of the degree of dereliction of duty in the implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. From these assessments, provisions must be made to compensate the states that have been most damaged by the failure of the major greenhouse gas emitting states to discharge obligations under the convention. In such cases, a fund should be set up to assist vulnerable states in taking delinquent states to the International Court of Justice. 11. The state will abandon and will encourage other states to abandon entrenched, immovable national interests that have impeded the Commission on Sustainable Development, have been blocking the adoption in the UN General Assembly of a strong, legally binding agreement on climate change. Article 18 of the Charter of the United Nations reads, "Decisions of the General Assembly on important questions shall be made by a two-thirds majority of the members present voting. These questions shall include recommendations with respect to the maintenance of international peace and security." Undoubtedly, the impact of climate change could be deemed to fall under this category. The state will propose and urge other states to propose that in Copenhagen, given the urgency of the issue of climate change and its potential effects on global population and on the political, economic, ecological, and social global systems, that the requirement for consensus must be waived and a binding agreement on all states will be deemed to exist if 66% of the states concur. It is possible that a majority of the member states could agree to a strong, legally binding Copenhagen Protocol to the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. A strong protocol to the convention could then be used against the delinquent states, and a case could be taken to the International Court of Justice under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which has been signed and ratified by 193 states. Most delinquent states, including Canada and the U.S., have signed and ratified the convention. 12. The state will commit to, and will urge other states to commit to, a time-bound commitment to conservation and to subsidizing and investing in socially equitable, environmentally safe, and sound renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, forestry, etc. options that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. More of these provisions can be found on the website www.climatechangecopenhagen.org.